So it comes as no surprise that your work on this Zack Snyder Justice League vinyl set, which we're discussing today, is immaculate. As I've mentioned to you in the past, in our past conversations, I'm a sucker for simplicity, and this is the real deal with Darkseid, the mother boxes, all the superhero emblems, and the back, man. Like that's fantastic. So,
Oh, thank you.
obviously, there are certain projects that call for creatives such as yourself to go all out. But then there are ones that thrive so beautifully, like this, from keeping it simple and allowing these little details, such as the shading, the texture, and the whole thing looking like this Greek mythology illustration. Considering how epic Zack Snyder's Justice League film is, what kicked your thinking into narrowing your focus and not getting swept up into the massiveness of the film?
Honestly, it was just watching the film. I saw the Whedon cut in theaters, and like most people, I had a difficult time with it. And so when the film was being re-released, the Zack Snyder's version of it on HBO Max, I just decided, okay, the day one, I'm gonna curl up, I'm gonna watch it, and let's see how different this really is, right? And almost from the beginning of it, I immediately saw what it was doing, which was interesting because like I had a hard time figuring out what he was doing in Batman versus Superman personally. But the second I got like through the first hour and I could see the differences between what he was doing and what the Whedon version was doing, I immediately saw the gods on Earth thing. I immediately saw the modern Greek gods, analog, the symbology. I saw it's in my head. And then, and it's a scene that's like sort of there in the Whedon version, but like it's really there in the Snyder version. When Diana Prince goes to that cave with the staff, and she opens up the thing and you see the temple that has the wall paintings, the cave paintings of what Darkseid has done. That immediately clicked for me. I was like, oh, this has to be, like, this is the iconography. And so, the process dictated it in a weird way because it kind of came on our plate pretty last minute. We were working with Warner Brothers on a couple other DC projects like Wonder Woman 84 and Aquaman and Shazam. And like, we had put out the Mandalorian box set. We had put that out and that started shipping to customers. And it was not too long after that Warner Brothers asked us if we would ever consider hypothetically releasing a box set for a single title like that for them. And I could almost assume that it was going to be Justice League, just assuming how epic in scope it was. And then once I heard that it was like a 4-hour long thing, I was like, oh, this is going to be really cool. And then we got looped in with the Snyders, with Deborah Snyder at least, on an email chain. And I was like, hey, I just saw the movie. It was amazing. Do you guys have like photos or like things from that like set? And they were like, oh yeah, hold on just 1 second. And then sent me like all this amazing onset photography from that day of shooting from years ago. And the amount of detail that went into it, I was just sort of like, oh my God, okay, yeah, this has to be it. Because once I could see it even more up close in person, I was just like, oh, this is so beautiful. This is so, and I feel like it's on screen for like 30 seconds, right? You see it and just like brief flashes, and the amount of detail and intricacy that went into it, I really fell in love with that imagery. And I was like, this has to be the thing that envelops, because it's sort of like it's the ancient tale. It's a thing that brings them all together in the long run. So I saw it in my mind's eye and I was like, this has to be the way we start.
Gotcha. You spoke to this a little bit, but what does a film, TV show, or what have you need to have for you and your team to decide, oh yeah, this requires a little more on the canvas?
Oh, I honestly, every single project is different, and it depends on, things like timeline, things like, I guess, whether or not it's going to be a complex approval process. I wish that every single thing started at the same starting line and ended at the same finish line, but you'll be surprised at how many titles you start and then you're mid illustration with freelance artist, hired them to work on artwork, and then you find out like, oh yeah, sorry, the lead talent, you cannot draw them whatsoever 100%. And you go like, oh, that would have been nice to know like a month ago. Okay, cool, starting over. And then that informs, and you begin to pick up on this, like you not that it's all certain talent, but like I remember we were trying to work on a James Bond title many, many, many years ago, and we learned very early on that like none of the Bond actors can be drawn ever. It's why you ever look at any pop culture stuff, any official merchandise for Bond titles, there's never any rendered illustrations of anybody to look like Connery, Moore, Dalton, all those people. You can draw a generic man in a suit, but you can't draw any of the actors as James Bond. And so like, knowing those things after having worked on certain titles, you immediately start, to borrow a phrase from Back to the Future, thinking fourth dimensionally. You have to like sort of go into a project and be like, okay, so I'm just going to presume that you can't do talent on this. So let's just go ahead and say like, what is the symbology of this? What is this movie about? What are the themes about? And how can we represent that best on the package? And then there's some things that like just need to, like we did Black Widow recently. In Black Widow, it's like, you can't just like not have Scarlett Johansson or Black Widow represented on it. It's literally called her, right? It'd be weird if it wasn't. So, we do Pixar titles, Disney titles, and you go like, well, this needs to be bright and colorful and poppy. And even though it's for an adult collector audience, like you want it to be evocative of, like the childlike reverence that it brings to you. You want it to be bright and colorful, right? And then there's some things that just call for symbology. Like we did Lost recently, a box set of that music, and I remember just being so excited because that show is so riddled with imagery, but like it's such an ensemble piece. It's all of its posters for its initial press run were always cast based, and the show is about the people, but like there's so much imagery of that show that is about just silhouettes of islands and statues and the symbols of the Dharma Initiative and symbols of all these different things that you go like, oh, we'd be lost if we didn't like try to find a way to make this feel more texturally like an item that lived in the universe rather than something that is like, hey, remember that thing you liked, here's a picture of it, like that sort of thing.
Right. So what's the balance involved in finding inspiration within the film itself, Hulkenborg's music, when you're listening to it on its own, the artwork that's already out there that you mentioned, maybe even some of the original comics, shows or films, anything that spoke to you personally when growing up with these characters? Is it all quantifiable, or is it just simply feeling it out until the shape feels right?
So I'm my primary role here is art director, and I will say that most of the time we like to give that option to the artist, whoever does it. Right now, I in this particular case, I did the artwork for this, so like this was what I saw in my head. If I gave this to a different artist, they may have saw something different. And it's a process. Sometimes filmmakers are involved actively, and sometimes they're not. We did In the Mood for Love fairly recently, a Wong Kar-wai film from 2000, and Wong Kar-wai was heavily involved in the approvals of all the artwork, right? And we went through like 50 concepts with the artist, but that's not because the artist was like, I have 50 ideas, but it was just like the artist actually like was just so inspired that like anytime we got a rejection, he'd come back with 10 new comps, and then before we knew, we had like all this like wealth of imagery that like we were actually able to pull different things from each round and put together a package that actually felt really cohesive. And sometimes we go to an artist in mind where it's sort of like, oh, I think that they could do something interesting with this, and we present it to them, and then they come back with their version. It surpasses everything that we ever would have thought, behind me I have this artwork for Atomic Blonde, which is a title that came out a couple of years ago. And the second I saw it, we saw it a couple of months early before it even came out, and we immediately were just like, oh yeah, we got to do like a pulpy crime novel thing, and we just went online and searched for like a bunch of legendary pulp paperback artists and just found this guy named Ron Lesser, who was just like a legend, still working, and he did something for Criterion recently, and we like gave him the concept, gave him the brief, and he gave us the illustration we were looking for, which was like Charlize Theron, like she was on the cover of one of those pulp novels, right? And I art directed it slightly because there were certain aspects of it that we were trying to fill the frame. It's obviously it's a different format. It's a square, so it's like a little stranger than your average narrow rectangle, where the text takes up so much of the space. If you can see, just sort of like there's like a lot of it's being taken up by text, and that's what makes it feel like that crime novel, right? And then there's the other aspect where you go like, okay, well, some people want to be heavily involved in the artist selection, but they don't really want anything to do with the art direction, and so they go, okay, well, we lay out a bunch of artists, and then they look at their artwork in the on their websites, and then they'll be like, yeah, this artist represents to me what I think my title is. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is some video game stuff. Like, I remember we were working on like Death Stranding or The Last of Us, and like a lot of times those studios will review the artist portfolios before they'll even let us get to the stage of presenting options. So like we have to present options just at that nascent stage, and then from there it's up to us for us to put together what we think is the best version of that with the artist that they chose based on the ones we selected for them. And most times they align with us, and it's not like we present them options we wouldn't want to work with, but it is definitely like you can't even think about what that art is going to look like until you know who's working on it, and then from there you have to sort of shape this thing. So it happens like it's a weird version of like a Rubik's cube that you're solving in real time as the colors are arriving on the cube, and it makes it sound hard, but it's actually really fun because sometimes they're easy, sometimes you have the vision and you can do it with assets. Like we did the soundtrack to Popstar, the Lonely Island movie, and like watching that movie, they have all these fake albums on it, and I was like, oh, we should just recreate those fake albums, and like that's super easy, and they're involved, and the Lonely Island were involved every step of the way, and like they made it easy. But then there's things like Justice League where you're like, oh man, I hope they like our pitch, and then they did, and then it was actually really easy, but then we had to like execute the pitch, and that's the scary part more than anything, is hoping that like as someone who actually did the illustrations on this, that they aren't gonna just like look at it and be like, oh no, this isn't what we thought of it all. And then with that in particular, when I pitched it to them, it's so hard to represent, because I don't know, when you're looking at it, all the foil effects and the stamping, like you can do your best in Photoshop to like represent what that looks like, but you have to be like, oh, it's gonna look sick when it has like a foil stamped center, and you can see like the reflections of all the symbols, and you open it up, and like the individual sleeves are gonna have like, we're gonna like remove the white layer from underneath it so you can actually see the mirror board on all the symbols. It's gonna look really and like you could say all that, but like you just gotta hope that they can be that future thinking without sending them like swatch samples and print samples. But I'm super happy with how it came out, and I'm proud that they let us even play in that sandbox.
Yeah, as you should be. Now I'm eager to dive a little more into the back of this. So the Tim Burton fan in me is kind of screaming with glee, because not only am I getting a Greek mythology vibe from it, but it very much seems like the kind of concept art that Mr. Burton would do for his works. Did that at all factor into your head when you were developing this? Because it's not just like the gothic nature of it, but also the text, some of that text right there.
Yeah, so I mean, I can't lie. I mean, Burton is a huge inspiration to me as an artist. I've seen multiple exhibits of his work in real life, and I love how evocative his illustration style is. Though I wouldn't say that that's my illustration style, but like combined with the cave paintings and like trying to make it feel as simplistic as possible, while also estimating my limitations as an illustrator, while also knowing that the how it was going to be interacting with the elements that we were doing with the print, like the foil stuff. I had to simplify some stuff. And so when doing that, I'm sorry. It's my first time looking at it in a long time also myself, because we didn't even like market the back cover, because I was sort of like, this is going to be a little too much to explain. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, look, Burton's Batman's, Burton's early films in general are just like such a huge part of my DNA. It certainly isn't a direct homage, but I definitely can see where I've lifted some of that iconography, especially the city. Sure. This thing right here is very much like, because I was just at the Academy Museum in LA, the brand new one, and they have a bunch of Batman stuff, like of like the matte paintings and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I was just staring at them for minutes on end, just being like, I cannot believe how simple these actually are in person, because they are so evocative yet they are just like silhouettes cascaded in like fog, but they really just feel like a full city, and they are just as simple as like color graded, you know, like generic building forms, you know, obviously a little bit more epic in scope with giant globes, like you know, Epcot style globes in the background, and things that are, you know, statues holding gigantic what look like levers. You know, there's stuff like that that's like so interesting, that like is Art Deco, but also is like really completely like brutalist. I don't know. It's very, very cool. And I don't know. I was watching the end of the movie, because that's what that is, the portal into the cityscape as it's being destroyed. I saw that imagery and I just knew that like, oh, I got to create a silhouette of like the generic city. But I had to just sort of look at it for a while and be like, what is the architecture of this universe? Because it's obviously like a little bit more of a realistic version of Gotham and Metropolis than the Burton style things, but I hope I added a little bit of a fantastic element with it to some degree.
Yeah, I would say so. Now I got to ask a little bit about the packaging itself and the texture, as you're already alluding to, but do you guys get like really nerdy, like I probably would, in an American Psycho kind of fashion, where you're just drooling over the paperweight, how it reflects off the light, the lifts and feels as you run your finger across it?
We do, but we kind of came up with a house texture early on. You know, we like this like matte varnish finish for most of our stuff. We do some reverse board stock. I wish that our package was always a heavier weight than it is, but like I also don't want our records to like, I mean, I like it personally when you open up your records and they kind of crack because they're so thick, and you know, like especially when there's tip-on jackets. Like we made the decision not to do tip-on early on. I'm glad we did, because it's really backed up now to make tip-on jackets. But like with regards to the texture, we work with partners at our printers that like kind of already have our presets, and then it's a matter of working backwards from there to hit the specifics, right? So it's like, okay, well, we want there to be spot varnish on this, but like it's hard to make spot varnish work if you're doing reverse board. So how do you work within that space? And sometimes you have to experiment, and sometimes it doesn't work. Like there was one project we did that we wanted to do reverse board and spot varnish, and it like just soaked it up. It just ate it. And like, you know, you learn the hard way, right? Like they tried to warn us, and I was like, well, you know, maybe it'll be subtle, but it'll still be there. And I touched it when I got it, and I was like, no, this is like way too subtle. And you know, like that's part of the process. And you know, I would love to say that I came from the world of print, but a lot of the stuff I've learned on the fly for the last 10 years. And now I know what I like. Like, you know, Spencer, my partner who does Death Waltz, he's really into foil stamping and numbering things. And like, we're trying to do a lot more, to make it feel special when you get the finished package, especially if it is a true limited edition thing. And for me, the things that I'm learning about it are a lot more working backwards to avoid the things that annoy me about packages when I get them. One of the things that stands out to me in my head that's always annoyed me as someone who collects DVDs in box sets. I used to collect South Park DVD box sets, and the South Park DVD box sets always were like, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with those sets in particular, but like, you know, the year was 2000. What?
Like different shapes and spine text not matching up.
Yeah, not lining up. You know, and so I very early on, like it was probably like 5 or 6 years ago now, we did the Marvel Netflix series, and that was how I learned how to get spines to line up. And ever since then, I've been so OCD about that, especially if they're going to look nice next to each other, or they're part of a series, right? Was just working to make sure that, because like the last thing I would ever want is for someone to get something and it not line up. And so like with this, with all 7 sleeves on it, like I had to spend so much time to make sure everything was always so specific and nuanced and detailed, because it's like, it would drive me nuts if one of the things was out of alignment. And we had this Batman the animated series box set that we did as a volume 2, and the first one we actually did at a different plant, because that was like one of our first box sets we ever did, and we ended up doing some of the print elements in Singapore, and they had to be shipped on a boat to the plant to get pressed and blah blah blah. And then, you know, since that time, which was like almost 7 years ago, now the plant that we press at can actually do those box sets. And so in my head, I was like, oh, great, same template, same all this stuff. And then when I got the second Batman box set, I noticed that the spine was slightly different, and it drove me wild. So long answer to your question, yes, we do go pour over those details. But I will say I'm lucky I can save some of that brain space because we came up with a house style early on. You know, like we always try to do gatefolds. We always try to have it be a certain, like a 20-point cardstock. We always try to have it be a matte varnish finish with additional spot varnish if necessary. We started doing like floods of color inside the pockets if it mandates it. We always try to have a certain kind of cardstock for our inserts. Like all these things sort of, those are the defaults, and unless otherwise specified, we will work with the plant to make sure that we can hit what we're trying to do. And there's always room for improvement, but I also don't want anyone going back and being like, oh man, the old stuff used to be shit, right? You know, and like now the new stuff's so much better. So we try to like gradually improve things and make things look a little bit better. But yeah, sorry, does that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I appreciate your meticulousness on that. It definitely appeals to me as a avid collector. Two more details that I really liked was the glossy, how grabbable each of these are, because that's another frustration I can have when they're box sets, is how difficult it is to kind of get something out. So that makes it really easy. And then also I believe it's disc 7 on Dark Side, and it's Omega symbol, the Omega symbol that's on the back of what would be side B. Was a really nice touch.
Well, yeah, I that's like another illustration I had to do, was drawing that etching, because like, you know, it's there, it's sort of subtle, like when he like lands on the planet the first time and he smashes the ground, it erupts into those flames in that symbol. So I just stared at that. I took a bunch of screen grabs when I was watching the movie, and I just like tried to align it with like that like fiery cascade of rivering lava from when he collides. And then I asked, when they did their character posters, which is what a lot of the sleeves are in reference to or an homage to, they had some of those symbols, but they didn't really have a symbol for him. Mm-hmm. And so like I had to sort of retrofit one and make one, and luckily that worked for them. I mean, I know that is a symbol because it's on his breastplate, but like I had to like be like, I guess I'm committing to this because everyone else has a symbol and we have a 7th disc, and I guess we'll make this the Omega symbol. And I'm glad that I hit the nail on the head, apparently, because they let me do it. So
good. Well, this was great. I appreciate. I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day. I'm really into design and collecting, and so this you're one of my favorite creatives to talk to. So
thank you.
Appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it means the world to me. This is like, this job is surprisingly hard, and it's far more riddled with like weird corporate stuff than we like these days. And so hearing anybody be like, I appreciated the small detail you put into it, and it's like, thank you so much, because that's the fun stuff. That's the stuff that like we do for ourselves, and we want to make sure that anyone, and plus these things finish up like, by the time they get to people's hands, we're already working on the next 3, right? And so like feedback, we very rarely hear the feedback when we need to, and trust me, I'm very much appreciative of any positive feedback. It means the world. Thank you.
Yeah, the hard work shows. Well, have a great rest of your day. Again, appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll talk again down the line.
Yeah, happy holidays.
You too.